The US will pour more than $20 billion worth of high-tech military equipment into the Gulf. Washington argues the move's needed to counter threats from Iran and other foes. Just how would the deal promote US goals in a volatile region? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm David Foster. The United States has admitted it has plans to ship advanced weapons systems to key allies in the Middle East. And this as the US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and the Secretary of Defense Bob Gates have been meeting allies in Egypt on Tuesday, seeking support for their efforts, as they put it, to stabilize the region. Washington says it has to do this to counter threats from its enemies.
Well, the assistance discussions that we are having with Egypt, with Israel, with Saudi Arabia, and with other Gulf states, and I might note that there are several Gulf states with which we're having those discussions, fall in a long line of American efforts in this region going back decades to help assure the security of our friends and allies in the region. There's really nothing new about this. We're coming to the end of a 10-year program with Egypt, the end of a 10-year program with Israel. Under Secretary of State Nicholas Burns will come out to the region sometime in the next couple of weeks to have further discussions. But the United States is determined to assure our allies that we are going to be reliable in helping them to meet their security needs. We have a lot of interest in common in this region, in the fight against terrorism and extremism, in protecting the gains of peace processes of the past, and in extending those gains to peace processes of the future. So it makes perfectly good sense that that positive agenda on the diplomatic side, and I want to emphasize that there is a very active now and intensive diplomatic process in place too, that diplomatic process would be accompanied by efforts to help our allies defend themselves against any threats. It's a positive agenda. It's not aimed at anyone.
Now, under these proposals, billions of dollars worth of high-tech arms are going to be shipped to Egypt, Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries over the next 10 years. And Israel will also benefit from this multi-billion-dollar arms pledge bonanza. The US has promised $13 billion worth of military hardware to Egypt. Egypt has received US military aid since the 70s, but this deal ensures aid over a further 10-year period. America has also promised a 10-year deal to Saudi Arabia and Gulf countries, and this one is worth $20 billion. The most generous 10-year package is reserved for Israel, the US's closest regional ally. Valued at a huge $30 billion, it represents a 25% annual increase on previous US arms packages to that country. However, it's too early to give specific details. We don't know them yet. The deals are going to be finalized in coming weeks, and Congress has yet to approve them. Well, reacting to the deal, the Syrian Foreign Minister Walid Muallem condemned as dangerous the multi-billion-dollar package. For its part, Iran's foreign ministry had this to say: Americans have pursued a particular policy, creation of fear and concern among regional countries in order to prepare an opportunity for selling arms. We're joined now by our guests who are going to discuss this issue. From New York, Ambassador Richard Murphy, a former Assistant Secretary of State for Near East and South Asian Affairs. In Dubai, Mustafa Alani, Senior Consultant and Director of Security and Terrorism Studies at the Gulf Research Center. And from the Iranian capital, Tehran, Sadeh Zibak Alam, Professor of Political Science at Tehran University and one of Iran's leading political thinkers. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story. Mustafa Alani, if I could come to you first of all, is this simply the United States building up a Sunni power bloc against the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran?
I don't think there is a sectarian dimension in that. It is the question of political allies of the United States. We have to remember that since the disappearance of Iraq as a major military power and as traditional balance to Iran, now there is a need, an urgent need, to restructure the military balance in the region. And the United States have no option but to help the countries which basically have a common objective with the United States. It is not the question of love to the United States, it's a question of need. And we have to remember the United States now, with the problem in Iraq, with the problem in Afghanistan, in more need to the regional state help than these regional states the need of United States. So it is an attempt to restructure the military balance and political balance in the region, and it is really a very needed policy now.
Okay, if it's not the United States trying to build up any kind of bloc, is this being provided to these countries because they fear a nuclear-powered Iran?
It is not only the question of nuclear power Iran, it is the question of interventionist, expansionist policy of Iran. We suffered for the last few years from the Iranian intervention in Lebanon, in Iraq, and Palestine, the question of the Iranian nuclear development, and the question, just 2 weeks ago, the Iranians revived their claim over Bahrain, which is an important state in the Gulf. So the question here, Iran now taking advantage of United States failure in Iraq and failure in Afghanistan, and we will, in the Gulf, we're going to be the victim of this policy.
Richard Murphy in New York, is this any different to what we've been seeing over the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, where a lot of military money is pushed into a very volatile region for obvious reasons?
On that issue, there's no difference. It's a long-standing policy in Washington to be the prime supplier of military equipment to Saudi Arabia, and to be certainly available for requests from the other Gulf states. So that's not new. What's new, I think, is the setting of this particular presentation, this particular visit to the area. It's unusual and perhaps unprecedented to have the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State traveling to the area at the same moment for this rather complex mission they've undertaken.
So what kind of message are they trying to get over by double-heading the visit?
I think assurance, on the one hand, assurance that we will continue to be reliable suppliers of defensive equipment to the region, to our friends in the region. And the other message is, as far as on the political side, that Washington hopes to encourage the governments in the area to be more supportive of the Maliki government in Baghdad, and to work with Washington on towards this conference in September on the regional basis to advance a Middle East peace process, to revive a Middle East peace process.
But when you put your most powerful international diplomat and your most powerful defense politician into the same arena, into a very, very difficult area, it will be seen by some, do you not accept, as saber rattling, some form of gunboat diplomacy?
It's already excited that reaction in Tehran. It's excited criticism, I understand, in Beirut. Prime Minister Signor has been critical of it. So that was to be expected. Yes, it's a major move. It's a major display of American support, both military and political, and it is making some of the parties uneasy and uncomfortable.
I'd like to talk a little bit later on about Fouad Senor and the Lebanese connection, but if we could go to Tehran now. Sadeh Zibak Alam, thanks very much for joining us tonight. You've heard what Richard Murphy had to say, that this is principally about reassuring the United States friends in the region. Why should Tehran worry about that?
Well, unfortunately, if you just listen to what my colleague, for whom I have a great deal of respect, Dr. Al-Alani in Dubai, United States has been trying to build this image, trying to convince the Arabs that you have an enemy called Iran. You have to be aware, you have to be frightened, you have to be scared, you have to arm yourself to the teeth because of Iran. And unfortunately, people like Dr. Mustafa Alani, you just heard what he said, fall into the trap of what United States is laying in the region. United States, by arming regimes in the region and under the pretext of being frightened of Iran, pushing and forcing the region towards destabilization and less security. I mean, everyone knows that Middle East has enough arms, and all the regions, including Iran, have more than enough, more than plenty of arms, and there is no justification for actually shipping more arms into the region.
Okay,
the only natural reaction from...
A couple of follow-up points, if I may. Are you worried particularly about the fact that Gulf Arabs and Egypt are getting these arms, or is it more about the fact that Israel is being given, if you like, the lion's share of this?
Iran is neither worried about United States arming United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, any other Arab country, because Iran basically, contrary to what United States is trying to put into the mind of the Arab people, that Iran is your enemy. We Iranians feel no threat perception from our Arab neighbor, and contrary to what Dr. Alani said, we have no expansionist desire for our Arab states. Our involvement in Lebanon, which Iran has never made any denial, was to support the Lebanese Shiite. And I think Dr. Mustafa Alani should be proud as an Arab. If he is genuine an Arab, he should feel pride that for the first time, Arabs were not defeated by the might of the Israeli army.
Okay, I think that's something that we've devoted a great deal of time to on this program, and no doubt will in the future, but not necessarily tonight. I want to ask specifically about Iran's response to this. Will you now turn to those people who you might see as your allies, and I'm thinking perhaps of Russia here, and say, listen, this is what the United States is doing. You've got to give us some kind of help?
I don't think so, because Iran, no matter how sophisticated weapons Egypt has, Saudi Arabia has, United Emirates has, Iran, honestly, Iran doesn't feel any threat from those countries. I mean, imagine that.
But you did leave out Israel, didn't you? You didn't mention Israel just then.
Well, again, Iran doesn't feel any particular threat from Israel. Of course, in Iran, there are many people, including Iranian president, who are very much against the state of Israel. But the official policy of the Islamic regime during the past 3 decades has been that we have nothing to do with Israel. We are not going to enter into war with the state of Israel.
Mustafa Alani, really, is there a danger, the same point that I put to Tehran, I'm going to put to you, is there a danger that this could encourage some kind of arms race in the Middle East, with America on the one hand and maybe Russia, China perhaps on the other hand?
Well, the Iranians already involved in arm race. Look at the Shihab development program, Shihab missiles development. Look at their nuclear program. Look at their interventionist policy in Iraq. Look at the question here, Mr. Qutbzadeh involved in the deception policy of Iran. Iran is not angel. Iran is the major source of instability in the region. Look at reviving the claim over Bahrain after 1970, where the matter was settled officially by the United Nations. Now we have a major figure in Iran saying Bahrain is part of. So the question here, the question here, excuse me, the question here, this, you know, the Iranians want to appear as an angel. Yes, thank you very much for the help in liberating south of Lebanon. South of Lebanon liberated now. What the Iranian influence doing in Lebanon now? Why the Iranian interfering in Iraq? Why the Iranian interfering in the Palestinian issue, where there's thousands of miles between them and Palestine? So the question here for us, there is a deep concern about the Iranian interventionist, expansionist, aggressive policy. And we have the right to be armed. The Iranians never ask our permission when they develop their missiles. They never ask our permission when they develop their nuclear power and capability. We are not under obligation to ask the Iranian permission or acceptance of if we decide to improve our military
Mustafa,
capability.
I'm going to stop you there, and I'm going to give Mr. Ziad Alam a chance to respond to what you said a little bit later on. But I want to bring in Richard Murphy once again in New York. Most of your life has been involved in looking at problems in the Middle East. Joseph Lieberman, one of your senior senators, said today that this is all about oil, that the Gulf crisis could raise oil prices so high that would have a devastating impact. In all your years here, when people have said, look, American interests are purely about oil in the region, have you been able to look them in the eye honestly and say no?
I have done just that. Our policy has never been just about oil. Oil certainly is a factor. Energy concerns, it's a major concern in Washington and world capitals. But I have said repeatedly, for instance, that ever since the first war expelling Saddam Hussein's forces from Kuwait, the issue of oil has been practically negligible in the U.S. policy, because it is now a question of the market. World prices are set, they're high, they're troubling everyone around the world, but it's not a threat to American interest in particular. And we did not go up against Saddam Hussein in 2003 because of oil.
Now, Condoleezza Rice, Mr. Murphy, Ambassador Murphy, has made it plain in her view that this is about providing people with defensive capabilities rather than offensive ones. I suppose it all depends how you look at it, doesn't it?
Yes, and that's going to be debated, of course, in our Congress when the program is formally presented in September. There is always going to be an element saying, well, how do you distinguish between offensive and defensive? And there's an element which will always criticize any military support given to Arab states, at least to those states that have not entered into a formal peace treaty with Israel. That concern about Israel is uppermost for some of the Congress.
And the suggestion that you can fight radicalism with smart bombs and fighter jets, does that hold weight with you? No, and that's why I think you should look at the complex nature of this visit. There is certainly among America's goals at this point in time is getting support for the Maliki government and getting support for the first step that the administration has taken, that this administration has taken in some years, to revive the peace process. And that's going to be a hard sell to get some of our long-standing friends in the area to accept either of those goals. Mr. Zibak Alam in Tehran for us on this edition of Inside Story. If this is designed at all to make Iran think again about its nuclear ambitions, whether they be for power or for weaponry, will it have that effect?
I don't think so. Iran has stated quite categorically and quite clearly that Iran is not after nuclear weapon, because everyone knows in Iran that to have or not to have nuclear weapon would not change anything as far as the security of Iran is concerned. It is unfortunate that United States, rather than pushing for disarmament, regional cooperation between the Arab state and Iranian in the region, unfortunately, the United States is pushing this policy of making a nation being frightened of each other, and you can see the like of people of Dr. Alani that unfortunately buy the U.S. theory that Iran is your enemy. For instance, Dr. Alani,
you have to ask yourself, don't you? You have to ask yourself why somebody like Mustafa Alani, who you said that you respect and you've known for many years, why would he buy something like this? He's not a fool, is he?
Well, I mean, Dr. Alani lives in Dubai, and he says that Iran is interfering in Iraq. If Iraqi people say that Iran is interfering, one can understand. But I mean, how on earth Richard Murphy from the other side of the world is saying that Iran is interfering in Iraq, and Dr. Mustafa Alani, who hasn't been living in Iraq for many years, he says Iran is interfering in Iraq. But you don't hear that from the legitimate Iraqi government. Nouri Maliki government, nor his ministers, nor Mr. Talabani, the president, neither of the Iraqi legitimate leader say that Iran is interfering.
Well, I'm going to let you two, I'm going to let you and Mr. Alani sort out your differences in a different environment. I'm going to ask Mustafa Alani now about the comments by Fouad Seniora, the Lebanese Prime Minister, in which he railed against this plan, when in fact his government's often described as Western-backed and very close to the United States. Why would he have got so infuriated by it?
Actually, I don't. Certainly, we have to understand there is no left to the United States in the Arab world. There is a need, strategic need. And the Lebanese Prime Minister basically reflecting a view of certain part of the Arab world that they think that a new arm race will not be in favor. We are not talking actually about arm race. We're talking about modernization over 10 years, spread over 10 years. And as we mentioned in the beginning of the program, the United States is a traditional supplier of arms. This is nothing new in this. I don't understand why people taking this so seriously. It is traditional policy. And there is a need even in the region now to restructure the strategic balance in the region. The disappearance of Iraq is a major development, strategic development in Iraq as a military power in the region.
Is the United States buying fair weather friends here?
Well, certainly we have a different attitude toward the United States, even in the region where the United States present here. Even in the top of leadership, there is no any more trust in the United States. United States lost credibility, lost capability in the region, and we need to build our self-defense capability. This is a simple question. We have the right to build our self-defense capability. United States suffering, and we don't want to rely on United States defense forever.
Richard Murphy, the United States isn't at all interested in making friends out of all of this. That's never been its policy. It's about self-interest, isn't it?
Well, isn't that true of every capital around the world? I don't think that's peculiar to the United States. Let me say, in terms of Prime Minister Seniora's statement, he is in an extremely difficult position domestically in Lebanon, the pressures from Israel, the pressures from Syria, and I think he was speaking from the heart when he did address the issue of the long-term American policy of assuring Israeli qualitative edge, as we have described it over the years in military terms, because his argument, and it's common in many Arab circles, is that this qualitative edge, in fact, increases stubbornness on the part of some Israelis in senior positions against moving on the peace process and establishing the regional peace that all of us want to see come about.
A quick thought from you. If these arms are being shipped already, and I believe some of them are, will they be in place and will they be useful to the United States if it decides to take on Iran militarily within the next 6-9 months?
Well, I doubt very much that any have been shipped, because this program has not been presented as yet to the American Congress.
Not specifically those, but we do know about Patriot missile batteries being shipped to Gulf countries as part of other programs of military aid to this region.
Well, correct. Now, those missiles were supplied over the recent years in response to concerns in those countries that they did face pressure, they did face a threat. That was their perception from Iran. Iran can say it poses no threat, but the perception among the Gulf Arab states is that they have to watch out.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. We've been talking about the U.S. military aid being given to Gulf countries and to Israel over the next 10 years, a massive program of military help, and the question's been, what use will it be to the United States? What use will it be to those people who live in this region? Richard Murphy, former ambassador, spent much of his life in the Middle East. Thank you very much for joining us. Sadegh Zibak-Alam from Tehran, political thinker, joining us from the Iranian capital. Thank you for your thoughts and for sharing them with Mustafa Alani, your friend and colleague from Dubai, a man with whom we've seen you disagree, but with whom I'm sure you agree on a great many points. We'll let you settle your differences later on. Well, the deal is for military aid over the next 10 years, but we will, because this is such a volatile region, undoubtedly see the effects of what the United States is planning to do much sooner than that. Thanks for watching Inside Story. Goodbye.